settled on Mars, believe it or not, as early as the late 1930s, early 1940s. The Nazis had already landed on Mars. They had some huge problems. They tried originally to settle around the equator, but there's these electrical storms that EMP'd all their systems, fried their systems. So now apparently the bases they build are around the North Pole, the pole, top and bottom pole, but especially the North Pole. And they have a facility there on Mars that has 200,000 personnel. And only 10,000 of those people are actually born on Earth. And it's apparently expanding very rapidly from what I've been hearing. So one of our earlier space program insiders, Henry Deacon, talked about this Mars city that they've got up there, which is one of the basic places that people end up going if you go into the space program. Now this is an enhanced image to show the contrast, but what we see here are these glass tubes, which may be lava tubes, but they're probably the result of intelligent construction for what would amount to underground trains, because this civilization was an underground civilization they built after the surface of Mars had been largely destroyed in the explosion. They had a lot of facilities already there. The explosion probably blew up some of them, and they built more, and then they built the face and pyramids and actually recolonized the surface of the planet. So these do look like glass, and that would be what we'd expect to see if they had gigantic underground boring machines that bored their way through all that material. So this civilization, this renegade group we call the progenitors, according to the military insider, Richard Hoagland's top insider, this military group, the progenitor people were on the run. They were criminals, and they were sent to our solar system. This was their place of refuge and escape. And they colonized our fourth planet, which is Electra or Tiamat. And this planet was where they grew to ultimately at least 100 billion people, and probably a lot more than that. They were all in the 70 to 100 foot tall range. They're very large, and a larger planet supports a larger body, so this all makes sense. So Mars would have been a much smaller moon compared to the size of this planet. Now, again, it was originally a moon, and then after the planet, it probably had some settlement. Well, the big planet was settled, and then after the big planet totally exploded, some of the settlers on Mars survived. So that might be the size of Mars compared to the original super Earth. It was very large. Now, here's the thing. This is a very essential point. Saturn apparently did not originally have its rings. This is one of the weird things that Hoagland's insider told me. Saturn originally just looked like Uranus or Neptune. There was no rings around it. What we did see was that these 70 feet tall people were building a gigantic ring out of some sort of super duper material that kind of looks like glass, but is apparently some advanced alloy that they were processing the raw materials from moons that they were mining and then building this ring out of using advanced robotics. It was a transparent aluminum of some kind. And what they did is they built this gigantic ring that was polarized, so even though it looks like glass, light could come in from certain angles but not all angles. So you could control who gets to see inside. And they were building this as a huge structure that people could actually live in, so that it was essentially a colony. Well, now here's the problem. These people are criminals. These people are wanted criminals, and they're very angry because they've suffered huge losses in war, and they do not forgive and they do not forget. So the people that were on their case still wanted to kick their ass, and they wanted to kick ass as well. It turns out that if you build a ring around a gigantic planet like a gas giant, you have a weapon using the same technology as the Tesla earthquake machine. You familiar with that? Where Tesla goes like this, and you keep doing it, and it's like those Roman soldiers that go across the bridge, right? And if they all are marching the same way, what happens? The bridge starts shaking like crazy. Well, if you start pulsing the planet, you can get this wave bigger and bigger, and then you can actually direct the beam to anywhere in the galaxy and frickin' blow up an entire planet, just explode the whole planet. They had gotten this thing 2/3 of the way done. They're saying, hey, we're just building a nice old housing complex, y'all. And the other enemies that they had, which were probably also very negative ETs, let's be honest, did not like this one bit. So what we heard was that their enemies came into town and took a look at this. Now, I'm just trying to give you an idea of what a glass structure would be like, but remember, there are still, this thing was shattered and it was exploded, so there's still pieces of this, tons and tons and tons of pieces of this kind of stuff floating around, toppling end over end in Saturn's rings. And there's an area where you can see the chunks. And our space program people have been out there and they've looked at the chunks quite extensively. You got chairs, control panels, consoles, and technology built for people 70 feet tall, all made out of glass. And apparently some of it still has working technology. So you can imagine that something that's almost entirely built out of this weird transparent glass would look very cool. And again, these people had extremely advanced technology, way beyond what we have. So the interior of this structure would have been quite something to behold. Very futuristic, very sleek, probably areas like this, all kinds of cool stuff. This is about the best looking things I could find on the internet to try to give you an idea of what this might look like if you could have seen it in its original form inside. Now, as I said, they could use this ring to create a big giant pulse wave and destroy any planet in the galaxy, and therefore it was felt they had to be stopped. So a massive attack was waged against them, and it destroyed their entire civilization. The ring was shot, and the ring exploded, and based on what Richard's insider and his people, which is basically the U.S. government faction, what they believe is that the planet was attacked as well as the ring at the same time, and they actually blew up the planet and blew up the ring simultaneously, and probably blew up some of the moons they had as well. So when that planet was blown up, when the ring was blown up, the insider told me that the shattered glass remnants that they've gone out and looked at are in the B ring, which, as you can see, is in the middle, right next to that big gap in between the two largest rings you see on Saturn. So there's the B ring in the middle. Now, you see where it says clumpy texture in the B ring? That is the remains of the original ring, and then as it broke apart and the dust spread out, the dust made all the other rings, which are very thin. So most of that stuff is all just fine, fine, fine shattered glass. But you see those lumps? You see how they're actually casting shadows against the rest of the rings? All of that stuff, if you fly up to it up close, is chunks of glass habitation. This is what I was told. He told me this on the phone, then I went and looked at it for myself. And our people have been out there, and at some point when disclosure happens, all of this is going to be told to us. And so they said, well, David, we want guys like you to tell the public first. Let's see how they respond. Let's see if they freak out. Can they handle it? What do they think? Nobody's freaking out. There's a couple people that are going out because they got to go to the bathroom, but I don't see anybody screaming, oh my God! All right, you can handle the truth. We'll get to that in a minute. Yeah, I mean, this is cool stuff for me. I love this stuff. This is an actual NASA diagram of what they are saying that those ice boulders actually look like. They're not ice, and they're not boulders. They're actually the remnants of the progenitors. And remember, look at how tiny we are compared to them. So there's not a lot of use that we're going to get out of these structures unless we build rooms that are a lot smaller than what they needed originally when they built that glass ring. So Tiamat or Electra exploded, and here's the thing. Our Earth's moon was the crown jewel of their entire collection. The moon was actually an ancient build-out. I have been told by almost everybody who's a space program insider across the board, the entire interior of our moon, all the way around, 360 degrees in every direction, 20 to 50 miles deep, and it's all hollow, and it's all loaded with rooms for these 70-foot-tall progenitor people inside. The whole interior of the moon. That trips me out. And apparently their technology was so advanced that when they saw that their planet was going to be destroyed, they had an object that was made of nanotechnology the size of a baseball, and they portaled it way back into the past. And then in the past, it actually time traveled. It lands, and these little nano robots go in, and they build out the whole interior into this super advanced base. And then it just so happens that that moon is now ready to go right when they need it, because now the moon has changed. They've changed the timeline, and that build-out is now ready for them, even though they sent the baseball back, let's say, many millions of years ago, maybe even over 100 million years. So there was a last-minute effort to flee inside the moon. Apparently, billions of them managed to get in at the last minute, but the moon, even so, was heavily damaged as they fled. They could drive the moon away from the damage, but the problem is there were chunks of their original planet, which we now call asteroids, flying around everywhere, and they were getting hit. Boom, 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 boom. So they took a lot of damage, and a lot of that ancient base inside was destroyed. So what they did, the ones of them who lived through this, which apparently was not that many, they flew the moon out of the asteroid debris field, but this is a problem because the sun has a lot of gravity. So they either fall into some kind of gravitational capture or they get sucked into the sun. And they got to make a quick decision, so they did the calculations, and the best planet to go to was Earth. Now at this point, Earth was a swamp. It wasn't a place you'd want to be. It wasn't a good place to live on at the time. So what they did is they put the moon into an orbit around the Earth, which does what to the ocean? Creates tides. Tides start to generate life a lot more than what they had before. So this jump starts the works on the planet, which up until then it was really kind of a dump. And, and you had a bunch of big lizards going around, and, it wasn't anywhere near what it could be. So they started to terraform at this point. The moon was heavily damaged on the inside. There were bodies everywhere. It was horrible. They lost a lot of their technology. This is one of the things we've heard, is that after the moon went out there, they resettled on Mars, and they got shorter. Their height starts to drop. So this appears to be when they go down to about the 36-foot range and lower. So they lose their height, and they've got bodies all over the place inside, and it stinks. It's horrible. There's flies. It's just disgusting. So they have to resettle on the surface of the moon by building domes out of that same glass or something similar that they could still do, and they rebuilt their civilization in glass domes on the surface. At this point, they had trees and plants and all kinds of cool things under the glass on the moon. So the moon was like a really nice place to live. And they start traveling to the Earth as giant humans compared to what was native on Earth, which was probably just like caveman. And they began creating huge cities. And as the tides on the Earth kind of jump-started everything, and as the conditions got better, they eventually built an enormous civilization on Earth in what we now think of as Northern Africa. And that is the area that you see here as the Sahara Desert and Saudi Arabia, the whole Persian Gulf, and then on up even into the Carpathian Mountains up there. Now, there's kind of a problem here, isn't there? What does it look like right now? It's like a big old wasteland of nothing. Well, it turns out that these people still could not get over their warlike ways. They still wanted to kick ass. They still wanted to kill people. And eventually their enemies came and wiped them out again. And one of the most fascinating things the insiders told me is, forget about even leaving the Earth. If you're a treasure hunter and you want to find good stuff, all you got to do is have the advanced satellite technology they already possess and start digging down in the desert, the Sahara. You could go as little as 40 feet down, sometimes up to 200-300 feet of sand down, and there is an extraordinary amount of technologically advanced artifacts down there. They're everywhere. The Egyptians then ended up eventually living on what was the surviving highlands, the only part that was left after this war, which was actually where the Great Pyramid is, where the Sphinx is, right up there, at the top of the Persian Gulf, right up there between Saudi Arabia and Africa. That little tiny part was the highest area, and that's where civilization clung to. Now, these people obviously got blown up. This is what I was told. And apparently they still survived. Some of their descendants still survived, and they've been keeping themselves a secret. So a lot of this stuff about the moon is stuff they don't want us to know because they're still afraid that they're going to be isolated and attacked. They still think we're going to treat them as villains and criminals and want to kill them. So this appears to be one of the reasons why all this evidence about the moon has been suppressed. And one of Richard Hoagland's insiders, this NASA engineer Ken Johnston, was ordered to destroy all these original prints from Apollo that had things from the moon on them. And this is a conference at the National Press Club that they did that was covered by the Russian media. The American media wouldn't touch it. Now, NASA apparently concluded that we can't handle the truth. And just to make the point, I'm going to show you him. You can't handle the truth. Okay, guys, sure. Nobody's screaming. Nobody's running out of the room. But it was decided that you couldn't handle the truth. So then what we have is this Brookings Institution report that said that mankind might topple if we were faced by a race of superior beings. So they felt that we couldn't be told because our civilization and our way of life would collapse. Now, one of the coolest things that Ken Johnston found out, and other researchers that came after him, was that NASA apparently used frame 4822 to store multiple versions of the same image. And when you ordered 4822, usually it came out black, but what this guy Alex Cook started to do is he starts to order multiple copies of 4822. And apparently whoever was in the records room at NASA hadn't been vetted out on the idea that there's multiple versions of 4822 and was never told not to send them out. So as they ordered multiple versions of 4822, we get this building on the surface of the moon, one of the original buildings that the descendants of the progenitors built. It's still there. It's all made out of glass. Tell me that that thing is some kind of natural formation. I don't think so. There's a reason why they hid this from us, and doesn't it sound a lot like that base on the bottom of Saturn's moon Enceladus? Notice again, I said that there was that ribbed pattern on the base, and then we see something looking pretty darn similar to that on the surface of the moon, probably made out of glass. Now, the insiders in the space program who I've talked to have said that there are all kinds of glass ruins still on the moon, and they leave them intact so that people can go out and visit them and be reminded of these wars that they had millennia ago so that they won't keep making war with each other. On the dark side of the moon, which is never going to face the Earth, right? Because the moon, even though the light moves across it, it's always facing us in the same direction. That back side is called the dark side of the moon. We never can see it unless somebody had a satellite that could photograph the back. Well, who has all the satellites? NASA. NASA was chartered as a defense agency of the United States government. So they have the right and the need to classify information that they feel would threaten national security. So they don't want to tell you about this.